Everything government officials have been telling us about SARS-CoV-2 has been wrong. The U.S. responses to the recent pandemic that really started for us in late 2019 going into 2020, all the precautions that they've taken, shutting the schools down, shutting businesses down, shutting gyms down, shutting churches down, putting masks on kids, 6 feet social distancing, not accepting physical money, but credit cards and debit cards and using the tap feature. I know people who were scared to lose their jobs, so they took the jab. You know what I'm talking about. They took the vaccine. And there are a lot of good folks who left the military because of the vaccine mandates. There's a lot of people who resigned early from government agencies across the United States because of the vaccine mandate. And now we got a report coming from the House Sub-Select Committee on the lessons learned on SARS-CoV-2. And it's contrary to what people have been saying. The Biden-Harris administration, their surrogates on the mainstream media was saying, celebrities in Hollywood was saying, shaming people for not taking the jab. Come to find out that this jab was experimental and had side effects. My body, my choice. Only when it comes to abortion, but everything else gets thrown out the window. Why? That's really ridiculous. And so I'm going to read to you the final report. COVID Select concludes 2-year investigation, issues 500 plus page report on lessons learned and the path forward. This was published. This is on the Committee on Oversight for these types of things. It's an official report published on December 2nd, 2024. I'll get into a little bit of the introduction. Today, the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic concludes its 2-year investigation into the COVID-19 pandemic and released a final report titled After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic. The lessons learned and a path forward. The final report will serve as a roadmap for Congress, the executive branch, and the private sector to prepare and respond to future pandemics. There are people that I know right now, to this day, 2024 in December, that were scared and are scared to death. They're still wearing masks. They're still social distancing. They did a whack mind job on, I think, older people, especially older black people, because when I go back home to New York, I'm in black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and then it bleeds over into like Asian neighborhoods and stuff like that. And I got to tell you, blacks and Asians, they bit the apple hard. You guys destroyed their psyche. When I say you guys, I'm talking about the Biden-Harris administration, their surrogates on the mainstream media, and their surrogates in Hollywood that was pushing this fear-mongering tactic to get us in line. All right, let's dig into the body of this, right? So the first part is, let's talk about the origin of COVID-19, right? The origins of the coronavirus pandemic, including but not limited to the federal government's funding of gain-of-function research. COVID-19 or origin. COVID-19 most likely emerged from a laboratory, the report concludes, in Wuhan, China. The 5 strongest arguments in favor of the lab leak theory include The virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not found in nature. Data shows that all COVID-19 cases stem from a single introduction into humans. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were multiple spillover events. Wuhan is home to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research at inadequate biosafety levels, right? Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with a COVID-like virus in the fall of 2019, months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. So that wet market theory, flush down the toilet, throw it out the window. Why? Because we spent countless hours, countless U.S. taxpayer dollars to produce this 2-year report. That was long overdue. I think it should have came out 2 years ago. By nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced. Proximal origin publication. The proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 publication, which was used repeatedly by public health officials and the media to discredit the lab leak theory, was prompted by Dr. Fauci to push the preferred narrative that COVID-19 originated in nature. Gain-of-function research. A lab-related incident involving gain-of-function research is most likely the origin of COVID-19. Current government mechanisms for overseeing this dangerous gain-of-function research are incomplete, severely convoluted, and lack global applicability. EcoHealth Alliance Incorporated. EcoHealth, under the leadership of Dr. Peter Daszak, used U.S. taxpayer dollars to facilitate dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. After the select subcommittee released evidence of EcoHealth violating the terms of its National Institutes of Health grant, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services commenced official debarment proceedings and suspended all funding to EcoHealth. New evidence also shows that the Department of Justice has opened an investigation into EcoHealth's pandemic-era activities. NIH failures. NIH's procedures for funding and overseeing potentially dangerous research are deficient, unreliable, and pose a serious threat to both public health and national security. Further, NIH fostered an environment that promoted evading federal record-keeping laws, as seen through the actions of Dr. David Morans and the Freedom of Information Act Lady Marge Moore. The efficacy, effectiveness, and transparency of the use of taxpayer funds and relief programs to address the coronavirus pandemic, including any reports of waste, fraud, or abuse. This is another category that they reported on. COVID-19 relief funding. Federal and state governments had significant lapse in coordination where were unprepared to oversee the allocation of COVID-19 relief funds and failed to sufficiently identify waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer dollars during the pandemic. Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program, which offered essential relief to Americans in the form of loans that could be forgiven if the funds were used to offset pandemic-era hardships, was rife with fraudulent claims resulting in at least $64 billion with a B, $64 billion of taxpayer dollars lost to fraudsters and criminals. Fraudulent unemployment claims. Fraudsters cost the American taxpayer more than $191 billion with a B by taking advantage of the federal government's unemployment system and exploiting individuals' personally identifiable information. Small Business Administration failures. $200 million of taxpayers' dollars were lost as a result of the SBA's inability to conduct proper oversight, implement internal controls, and ensure fraud protection measures were enacted. Transnational fraud. At least half the taxpayer dollars lost in the COVID-19 relief programs were stolen by international fraudsters. Wow. What was that percentage again? At least half of taxpayer dollars spent was stolen by international fraudsters. Right? So while you guys are worrying about P. Diddy and, the mainstream media trying to drive a wedge between Trump and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, all of those stories don't matter, man. It really doesn't. Right? You had people's lives destroyed because of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. People killed themselves during the pandemic because they couldn't face not going to school in person anymore in their senior year. They wanted to be around their friends before they graduated. COVID-19 relief funding oversight. Expanding relief programs that lack proper oversight functions expose severe vulnerabilities in the system and pave the way for fraudsters, international criminals, and foreign adversaries to take advantage of taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers. Come on now. The implementation or effectiveness of any federal law or regulation applied, enacted, or under consideration to address the coronavirus pandemic and prepare for future pandemics. World Health Organization. The WHO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic was an abject failure because it caved to the pressure from the Chinese Communist Party and placed China's political interests ahead of its international duties. Further, the WHO's newest effort to solve the problem exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic via a pandemic treaty may harm the United States. Social distancing. The 6 feet apart social distancing recommendation, which shut down schools and small businesses across the country, was arbitrary and not based on science. During closed-door ceremony, Dr. Fauci testified that the guidance sort of just appeared. Okay, Fauci didn't do anything to quell that, to extinguish that. He kept it going. Mask mandates. There was no conclusive evidence that masks effectively protected Americans from COVID-19. Public health officials flip-flopped on the efficacy of masks without providing American scientific data, causing a massive uptick in public distrust. You think? Lockdowns. Prolonged lockdowns cause immeasurable harm to not only the American economy, but also to the mental and physical health of Americans, with a particularly negative effect on younger citizens. Like I said, high schoolers that are seniors, teenagers, period, right? Rather than prioritizing the protection of the most vulnerable populations, which were elderly people and people with pre-existing conditions, federal and state government policies force millions of Americans to forego crucial elements of a healthy and financially sound life. New York pandemic failures. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's March 25th order, which forced nursing homes to accept COVID-19 positive patients, was medical malpractice. He wasn't even a daggone doctor. He was the governor of the state of New York that just gave an arbitrary order to contaminate otherwise healthy Americans that were living in nursing homes and commingled them with people who were sick with the COVID-19 virus symptoms. Evidence suggests Mr. Cuomo knowingly and willfully made false statements to the select subcommittee on numerous occasions about material aspects of New York's COVID-19 nursing home disaster and the ensuing cover-up. The select subcommittee referred Mr. Cuomo to the DOJ for criminal prosecution. Travel restrictions. President Trump's rapidly implemented travel restrictions saved lives. During Dr. Fauci's transcribed interview, he unequivocally agreed with every travel restriction issued by the Trump administration. This testimony runs counter to the public narrative that the Trump administration's travel restrictions were xenophobic. So Trump initiated the travel restrictions from other countries from people from other countries traveling to the United States. Everything Trump has done to minimize the effects of COVID-19 pandemic was criticized by the mainstream media and the Biden-Harris surrogates, as you know. COVID-19 misinformation. Public health officials often spread misinformation through conflicting messaging, knee-jerk reactions, and a lack of transparency. And the most egregious examples of pervasive misinformation campaigns, off-label drug use, and the lab leak theory were unjustly demonized by the federal government. The Biden administration even employed undemocratic and likely unconstitutional methods, including pressuring social media companies to censor language concerning COVID-19 pandemic, opinions, information from other news sources that were shared on Twitter back then. They were blocked. They were blocked on YouTube, blocked on Twitter, blocked on Google, blocked on most mainstream social media sites. The development of vaccines and treatments and the development and implementation of vaccine policies for federal employees and members of the armed forces. Operation Warp Speed. President-elect Trump's Operation Warp Speed, which encouraged the rapid development and authorization of the COVID-19 vaccine, was highly successful and helped save millions of lives. COVID-19 vaccine. Contrary to what was promised, the COVID-19 vaccine did not stop the spread or transmission of the virus. Rushed COVID-19 vaccine approval. The FDA rushed approval of the COVID-19 vaccine in order to meet the Biden administration's arbitrary mandate timeline. Two leading FDA scientists warned their colleagues about the dangers of rushing the vaccine approval process and the likelihood of adverse events. They were ignored, and days later, the Biden administration mandated the vaccine, right? I remember that. I was a Democrat supporter up until September of 2021, where Biden got on national television and mandated the goddamn vaccine. Vaccine mandates. Vaccine mandates were not supported by science and caused more harm than good. Well, no kidding. The Biden administration coerced healthy Americans into compliance with COVID-19 vaccine mandates that trampled individual freedoms, harmed military readiness, and disregarded medical freedom to force a novel vaccine on millions of Americans without sufficient evidence to support their policy decisions. It's all political, right? All political. It was all about power to force people to do what they didn't want to do with their bodies. My body, my choice, right? Only when it comes to abortion, I guess. Natural immunity. Public health officials engaged in coordinated effort to ignore natural immunity, which is acquired through previous COVID-19 infection when developing vaccine guidance and mandates. Vaccine injury reporting system. Vaccine injury reporting systems created confusion, failed to properly inform the American public about vaccine injuries, and deteriorated public trust in vaccine safety during the COVID-19 pandemic. It sounds criminal. What I've read so far, smash the like button if you enjoying this content. If you think this content needs to be shared, share it with family and friends. Vaccine injury compensation. The government is failing to efficiently, fairly, and transparently adjudicate claims for the COVID-19 vaccine injured. The economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic and associated government response on individuals, communities, small businesses, healthcare providers, states, and local government entities. Business impacts. The federal and state governments imposed mandatory lockdowns that were the primary cause of temporary and permanent business closures. More than 160,000 businesses closed due to the pandemic. Some of those businesses were black businesses that took longer than your average business to get up and running and scale, and they closed permanently. When you want to talk about disproportionately affecting the black community, this is one area that it did. Another area that it did was education. When you put masks on children and teachers, children cannot see the teacher's mouth move in the correct way to pronounce the word, and the teachers can't see the mouths of their children in the classroom move because they're wearing a mask, and they're unable to correct some speech deficiencies that they may develop early in life, right? With 60% of those closures classified as permanent. For the businesses that stayed or reopened, the lack of supply chain diversity exacerbated pandemic era challenges and deepened existing disparities. Healthcare impacts. America's healthcare system was severely damaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. Patients experienced a decreased quality of care, longer wait times, shorter medical appointments, and missed diagnosis. Unemployment rates surged to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Overly broad mitigation measures, including the now debunked 6 feet apart guidance, disproportionately impacted sectors with low wage earners. The Federal Reserve's aggressive, early, and unprecedented response to the COVID-19 pandemic prevented a severe economic turndown. This continued approach also contributed to staggering inflation. The societal impact of decisions to close schools, how the decisions were made, and whether there is evidence of widespread learning loss or other negative effects as results of these decisions, right? The science never justified prolonged school closures. Children were unlikely to contribute to the spread of COVID-19 or suffer severe illness or mortality. Instead, as a result of school closures, children experience historic learning loss and higher rates of psychological distress and decreased physical well-being. The Biden administration CDC broke precedent and provided a political teachers organization with access to its scientific school reopening guidance. Former CDC Director Rochelle Walensky asked the American Federation of Teachers to provide specific language for the guidance, and even went so far as to accept numerous edits made by the American Federation of Teachers. So the teachers union, I guess that the American Federation of Teachers, I guess, is the highest entity in the United States that influence other smaller unions, teachers unions across the United States. They were walking lockstep in keeping these schools closed and at-home learning going. No one had to travel anywhere. No one really had to wake up early. You just rolled out of bed and start teaching, and the kids start learning. Well, that doesn't work. Schools remain closed longer than necessary because of the American Federal Teachers Union political interference in the CDC school reopening guidance. AFT is a political union, not a scientific organization, that advocated for mitigation efforts that prolong school closures, including an automatic closure trigger. Testimony revealed that AFT President Weingarten had a direct telephone line to contact former CDC Director Walensky, right? So you got school teachers unions, representatives have a direct line to the CDC that provides recommendations to the public whether to shut down or go back to business, right? Standardized test scores show that children lost decades worth of academic progress as a result of COVID-19 school closures. Mental and physical health concerns also skyrocketed with suicide attempts by 12 to 17 year age girls rising 51%. Nobody talks about that. Cooperation by the executive branch and others with Congress, the inspectors general, the Government Accountability Office, and others in connection with oversight of the preparedness for and response to the coronavirus pandemic. The Biden administration's HHS engaged in a multi-year campaign of delay, confusion, and non-responsiveness in an attempt to obstruct the select subcommittee's investigation and hide evidence that could incriminate or embarrass senior public health officials. It appears that HHS even intentionally under-resources component that responds to legislative oversight requests. This is the reason why the report took 2 years to publish. EcoHealth obstruction. EcoHealth President Dr. Peter Daszak obstructed the select subcommittee's investigation by providing publicly available information, instructing his staff to reduce the scope and pace of productions, and doctoring documents before releasing them. Right, basically blotting out the important parts from the report. Dr. Fauci's senior advisor David Morans deliberately obstructed the select subcommittee's investigation, likely lied to Congress on multiple occasions, allegedly unlawfully deleted federal COVID-19 records, and shared non-public information about NIH grant processes with EcoHealth President Peter Daszak. New York obstruction. New York's executive chamber, led presently by Governor Kathy Hochul, redacted documents, offered numerous illegitimate privilege claims, and withheld thousands of documents without an apparent legal basis to obstruct the select subcommittee's investigation into former Governor Cuomo's pandemic era failures. So there you have it. The link to the this was obviously a summary of the report, and I will provide the link in the description below this video. But the full report is 527 pages, and this was just a summary. So smash the like button if you like this content, and please share if you deem necessary, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.